Madame la haute commissaire adjointe des Nations Unies aux droits de l'homme, Mesdames et Messieurs les représentants des organisations internationales à Genève, Monsieur le directeur général des HUG, Monsieur le doyen, Monsieur le professeur, chers collègues, chers amis, Mesdames et Messieurs, c'est un honneur pour l'Université de Genève d'accueillir aujourd'hui le professeur Jon KABAT-ZINN, figure pionnière de la pleine conscience, qui propose de porter son attention sur le moment présent, mais avec une qualité particulière, sans juger ce que l'on observe. Dans un monde en perpétuelle mutation, où les crises se multiplient et les repères vacillent, la question que pose le professeur KABAT-ZINN résonne avec une acuité particulière. Comment rester ancré et lucide? Comment faire face à la surcharge émotionnelle et professionnelle qui caractérise notre époque? Ces questions ne sont pas uniquement philosophiques, elles sont profondément pratiques et elles touchent au cœur des missions de l'université. Dans l'enseignement d'abord, afin de favoriser un environnement favorable à l'acquisition des savoirs, dans la recherche, pour apporter des bases solides aux connaissances biomédicales,
and, of course, in all its societal dimensions. For 4 decades now, Mr. KABAT-ZINN has revolutionized the way medicine approaches stress, suffering, and anxiety. His MBSR, Mind-Based Stress Reduction program, based on rigorous scientific evidence, has gradually found its place in hospitals and universities worldwide. He has also been the driving force behind a major paradigm shift with MBSR. Patients take an active and central role in their own health. This principle of participatory medicine, which is central today, did not exist back in the day. In Geneva, since the early 2000s, the university has been a pioneer in European research on mindfulness. This was made possible thanks to the initiative of Professor Guido Bondolfi, who is kindly moderating tonight's discussion. Among the many studies conducted here, I would like to mention 3. One examines how mindfulness can help women with breast cancer to better cope with anxiety and stress caused by illness. The second has demonstrated the positive impact of mindfulness on adolescents born very prematurely. And the third, currently underway, is evaluating how mindfulness enables students in the health field who are notoriously perfectionists and not very inclined to self-compassion to better manage stress and empathy. These initial results are very encouraging, particularly in terms of developing self-compassion, taking care of oneself in order to better take care of others. This ability is essential for healthcare professionals to be able to commit to their work in the long term. Beyond research, we also have integrated mindfulness into our training program. A joint certificate of advanced studies between the Faculty of Medicine and the School of Health Sciences has already trained 250 professionals in healthcare and education. Elective courses are offered in medicine, pharmaceutical sciences, and biomedical sciences, as well as workshops for our entire university community. This diversity demonstrates the adaptability of mindfulness to a wide range of needs. Tonight's conference has a strong symbolic dimension. It is part of the closing ceremony of the International Conference of the Office of United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNHCR, entitled United and Present: Global Solutions from Within. This partnership illustrates Geneva's unique role at a crossroads of health, human rights, education, and international cooperation. For mindfulness is not only an individual practice, it carries a message of solidarity and human dignity that brings together the fundamental rights of human values, the recognition of our common humanity. Professor KABAT-ZINN, we are impatient to hear you and to share your reflection on what it means to be fully present in a complex, changing, uncertain, and exhausting world. Your research, your experience, and your vision offers precious paths in order to explore valuable insights. In the name of the University of Geneva, I wish you all an excellent conference, and I now give the floor to Robert Mardini, Director General of the Geneva University Hospitals, HUG. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear partners, dear friends from the humanitarian world and that of fundamental rights, it is a privilege and a pleasure for me to welcome you here this evening. Look at this room. It is full despite the traffic and the chaos that is taking place outside, an indicator of your success, Professor KABAT-ZINN. It's an honor for us to welcome Professor Jon KABAT-ZINN here this evening, the work of whom has inspired generations worldwide. Geneva is at a crossroads in terms of health, human rights, education, international cooperation. People meet here, and these disciplines meet here. And tonight, this illustrates the vocation where in a world that is complex, changing, where values are jeopardized, the quality of our presence is more than essential. At the University Hospitals of Geneva, we decided over 20 years ago to integrate mindfulness at the heart of our care, at the heart of our training, our well-being, and for our carers and patients. It is not only a tool, it's a way of being. It's a quality in terms of presence that we want to encourage in the 11 sites that we have here where the HUGs operate. We thank those who have opened the way, Professor Mondolfi and Lucio Binzini, who introduced these approaches, the MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, and MBCT, Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy, here in Geneva. Their vision allowed us to train over 800 professionals through international collaborations and to develop clinical practices that are recognized in terms of oncology, psychiatry, and many other fields. But this doesn't only concern our patients, it also concerns those who take care, the providers, on a daily basis. Thanks to the support of the private foundation for the HUG, we relaunched a program that was dedicated to our teams on mindfulness, a 9-week course. Since last May, over 150 employees have been trained and workshops have been offered. And these numbers demonstrate that there is a will, a commitment, and an institutional will to make of these practices the norm. Why is this so important? Because the quality of care depends on the quality of provider-patient relationship. And this is at the heart of what is the purpose of the hospital, because exhausting our employees is not a pathway we can take. Our priority is to support them as well as our patients. By supporting these practices, we invest in what makes the difference: presence, listening, empathy, and humanity. We are determined to pursue these efforts to build a culture where attention to the other is at the heart of care, a culture that transforms not only our practices, but also the way we are, the way we behave. Thank you to all those who contribute to this dynamic, this momentum in the HUG teams. They are numerous. Thank you to our partners, to University of Geneva, to the UN, to the OHCHR, that is facing multiple crises and defeats worldwide, represented here by the Deputy High Commissioner of Human Rights, Nada Al-Nashif. And thank you, dear Professor Jon KABAT-ZINN, for coming here to remind us that in a changing world, mindfulness is a strength for stability and opening. I wish you all a very good conference. Thank you.
Et je passe la parole.
And I give the floor to dear Nada Al-Nashif, the Deputy High Commissioner of the United Nations, Deputy High Commissioner to Human Rights. Thank you.
are already feeling in the family, very informal. But Vice Dean Collar, dear Director General Mardini, dear Robert, distinguished colleagues, partners, students, and friends, it's really exceptional for us as the Human Rights Office to be in this space. And it's a pleasure for me on behalf of the Office of the High Commissioner with the University of Geneva and the Geneva University Hospitals to acknowledge this very important collaboration and a really special partnership between our three institutions. Bringing together health, science, education, and human rights is a reflection of the integrated approach that today's very complex and interconnected challenges require. This is part of our commemoration of Human Rights Day, which was yesterday, and our Human Rights Day campaign this year was Human Rights, Our Everyday Essentials, reminding us that human rights are not abstract concepts or nice-to-have luxuries. They are the conditions that allow people to live with dignity, to feel safe, to learn, to work, and to engage fully in society every single day. What we reflect upon today connects us very directly to this message. The United Nations system, mental health and well-being strategy, further underscores that mental well-being is essential to the effectiveness of institutions. We just heard Robert speak about hospitals, but also the people that we serve within our institutions. It calls for creating environments that support awareness, compassion, and shared responsibility, not only for one's own well-being, but for the collective decisions and the actions that shape our common future. This aligns very closely with our High Commissioner's emphasis on pathways for solutions, the moral imperative to strengthen prevention, to address root causes, to foster the internal and external conditions necessary for what we aspire to, peaceful, inclusive societies all over the world. In this context, the recent General Assembly resolution on World Meditation Day is a very important milestone. It recognizes that contemplative practice, grounded in science and long-standing human experience, can contribute indeed to more peaceful and resilient societies. It reminds us that if the roots of conflict often arise in the minds and hearts of people, then the foundations of peace must also begin there, in attention, in presence, and in the capacity to relate to others without fear or dehumanization. These perspectives complement our legal and policy frameworks by strengthening the human capacity that we need to promote, to protect, and to uphold rights. We need discernment, we need emotional awareness, and the ability to respond, not just react. They support institutions that are more ethical, workplaces that are more respectful, and overall societies that are better equipped to face complex human relations. We are grateful to Professor KABAT-ZINN for his very generous time and joining us this evening, and for his sharing of the many years of experience and support to the work of our office. And I really hope that this evening's reflections will be meaningful and inspiring for us all. And above all, I hope it will help us to usher in a kinder, more compassionate new year on every front. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Nada, and thank you all. And good evening, everyone. It is really my pleasure now to introduce, and he was already introduced, Professor Guido Bondolfi. He's an honorary professor in the Department of Psychiatry at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Geneva, and a pioneer in introducing and integrating mindfulness into clinical practice and medical education in Switzerland. And also, he's a key partner in the collaboration between the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the hospital, and the University of Geneva. Guido.
Merci beaucoup, Mara. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici ce soir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here this evening and to speak to all of those who are interested in mindfulness. And I would like to introduce you to Mara Alzigara, who is head of OHCHR Wellbeing Unit and who works on the integration of mindfulness in the UN system. She is at the origin of this triple project within the United Nations. For us, it's an honor to present the Professor Jon KABAT-ZINN.
Into medicine and society at large. A global reference in contemplative practices, contemplative science, and an inspiration for professionals in health, education, public service, and beyond. In 1979, he founded the Stress Reduction Clinic and the Center for Mindfulness in Medicine, Healthcare, and Society at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. A scientist by training, his early work helped transform how modern medicine understands the mind-body connection, and he opened a path for evidence-based contemplative approach in clinical care.
Jon KABAT-ZINN a inspiré le développement.
Jon KABAT-ZINN inspired the development of programs founded on mindfulness, especially for the relapse prevention for people who are suffering from cancer. He obtained a doctorate in biology, molecular biology, and got the Nobel Prize in Salvador Modilia. He works on approaches to mindfulness and their effect on the immunity system. His influence, which was relayed by a huge international community, played a major role in the integration of mindfulness in institutions who are increasingly varied: medicine, psychology, neuroscience, schools, universities, companies, businesses, prisons, the army, and public administration. Today, over 700 hospitals and medical centers in the world offer the program that was founded by Professor Jon KABAT-ZINN, MBSR. The title of the conference is Mindfulness in a Changing World. And Jon, we can't wait to hear you, so please come to the floor and take the mic. Thank you.
Can you give me that? Can you hear me? Okay. Well, it's such an... does anybody have a hat I could put on? It's like, or can we, I guess we can't turn up the house lights because you're recording it, or can we turn up the house lights some? I like to be able to make eye contact with the people I'm seeing rather than just speaking into the darkness. Anybody wearing a hat they could lend me? I mean, I've seen His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, do this all the time. And, oh, there's a good hat. Okay, yeah, sure. Just pass it up. Are you okay with that? Thank you. I don't do hats, but, I mean, I do want to be able to make eye contact, at least with some fraction of the audience. Welcome. And I'm just really incredibly touched to be here. And to tell you the truth, my mind has been absolutely blown by what I've been experiencing here. And I've only been here 2 days, and they've been, or maybe it's 3, I've lost track, because, but it's just phenomenal what's going on in Geneva at the moment. And I just want to recognize all of the resources that have led to this moment, and particularly at UNIGE and the work of Guido Bondolfi and Lucio Bizzini, who I haven't seen in 25 years or something like that. And I want to mention Zindel Siegel, who was very instrumental in bringing MBCT to the hospitals here. And really, I think what we're experiencing is a renaissance of sorts in mindfulness, or the potential for a renaissance at a time when we really need a renaissance. I mean, the world is teetering on the brink of all sorts of major transformations that some of which seriously threaten the planet itself, our natural habitat. Never mind our children's minds, attention spans, and what it means to do meaningful work in the age of AI and soon AGI. So, from an evolutionary point of view, there's never been a more important time for us as humans to wake up. And people normally say, well, what do you mean, wake up? I woke up this morning. And sometimes I like to say, and as I've gotten older, I've gotten a little bit more lax in my kind of Zen-like rigidity, like, you have to go at this full bore. So, in my dotage, I've kind of suggested that maybe it'd be possible to actually meditate in bed. Which is a very radical suggestion from a kind of hardcore Zen perspective or anything like that. But think of it this way. How many of you would say that you woke up this morning? Raise your hands. I want to just say, and let it be noted by the stenographer that's not here that pretty much everybody woke up this morning. But is it actually true? Or did you jump out of bed on autopilot and you were already late by the time you made it to the bathroom? You know where I'm going with this. That a lot of the time we are living one step ahead of ourselves, very much on autopilot, driven by where we have to go and what we have to do. And we forget that we're actually called human beings. But we behave a lot of the time as if we're human doings and that we're wound up. And very often, if you start to pay attention, we're blasting through our moments to get to more desirable moments at some other time. And so mindfulness, we really have to understand how profoundly radical it is. It's not one more cognitive behavioral intervention, I'm sorry. And nor is MBSR or MBCT one more cognitive behavioral intervention. Because the M is really the only thing that's important. I could care less about MBSR. I care about the M. I could care less about MBCT. If it's helpful to people who have chronic depression and issues with anything having to do with the nature of the mind and the body, fantastic. But, I'm more of the sort of Maoist perspective, like may 1,000 flowers bloom, and let them all be mindfulness-based in the sense that mindfulness is synonymous with awareness. Let's just get it out there right from the beginning. And it's not something anybody has to get. Let's reflect for a moment about awareness. How many neuroscientists in the room, or quasi-neuroscientists? Raise your hands if you're a neuroscientist. Okay. I'm going to sort of go out on a limb here and say that no neuroscientist understands how you get to sentience or awareness out of the 200 billion neurons and the trillions of synaptic connections, and yet we have no idea how sentience arises, if indeed it even arises out of the brain at all. And that's a debatable issue, and there are many philosophers and Buddhist scholars who would debate the very materialist assumption that it's coming out of the brain. We are so ignorant. And let's remember that human history, if you think about history, okay, or civilization, do you want to call it like 7,000 years old, 9,000 years old? I mean, I don't know how far it goes back in Sumeria, Egypt, and so forth, but it's like, let's say it's 6,000, 7,000 years old. Okay, and if you say a generation is 20 or 30 years, let's say 30, and divide 600 by 30, you have 200 generations. That's nothing. Since with all of what we would call history or civilization, okay, no one knows how we can wag our tongues in concert with the air coming out of the lungs and with the vocal cords, and give rise to vibrations in the air that will go to your ears, and you can decode, and I don't know where the sentence is leading, but you can stay with me as it goes along, and it makes total sense. It's completely grammatical, and no one knows how that happens. Not even Noam Chomsky, who will be the first to admit it, and talks about mystery in a certain way. So I'd like to just sort of start by saying something about a study that Zindel Siegel and his colleagues at the University of Toronto, one of the founders of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which is such a big element of what's wondrous about what's going on here in Geneva at the Hôpital Universitaire de Genève, that Zindel Siegel was very important in cultivating MBCT here and guiding the original people in how to introduce it and study it. And he did a very interesting study with some of his colleagues that I think was published in 2008, if I remember, where they took people, and this was not an MBCT study, it was an MBSR study, as I remember it. My earplugs are falling out. And they took people who were, I think, randomized to MBSR or not, and they put them in a scanner. And those people who went through MBSR, well, those people who did not go through MBSR showed a very active reason when they're told. How many of you have been in an fMRI scanner? Raise your hands. Okay, so you have to be, first of all, it's very loud, banging magnets. And the other thing is you're in a cigar tube like this, okay? And they say, don't, just lie there, don't do anything. Well, what could you do anyway? You couldn't even scratch your nose. But just lie there, don't do anything. And it turns out that when you give people that instruction to just lie there and don't do anything, there's a midline region of the frontal and cortex that just goes wild. I mean, it's just called wild. It's called the default mode network, because as soon as you put someone in the scanner and say, don't do anything, they default to something that's generating. And it turns out when you investigate what that is variations on our favorite theme, me. It's the story of me, what I have to do when I get out of the scanner, what's my shopping list or my laundry list, or when do I pick up the kids, or who is going to pick up the kids, or whatever. But it's like one thing after another. Then you take people who've been through 8 weeks of MBSR, and they look just like those people who were in the scanner, because the controls are, the groups are the same before the intervention, and they show the same kind of fMRI pattern. Then you take the group that's getting MBSR, and you look at them after the 8 weeks, and it's very interesting. You see attenuation in this default mode network. Nobody's told them what to do. They just say, go in the scanner, don't do anything. So it's the same instruction, but you see a real attenuation in this region, and you see activity in other more lateral regions like the insula, which is like different sort of maps of the body and so forth. And when you inquire or investigate what are you doing in that scanner, they're not so much lost in the story of me, because they've been trained in mindfulness. And what they're doing is lying in the tube and breathing. No one told them to breathe, but they are breathing. Of course, if they weren't breathing, they'd be dead. But they're not just breathing, they're aware of their breathing. And I want to just clarify that awareness is what we're talking about when we're talking about mindfulness. And then there are qualifiers. There are certain ways like, and you've probably read a lot about this, that moment-to-moment non-judgmental awareness. And it got mentioned in the introduction, the non-judgmental part. This is really easy to misunderstand and even misrepresent. Because non-judgmental doesn't mean that you won't have any judgments. I mean, it means that you'll have like an infinite number of judgments because that's what we humans do, but you won't judge the judging so harshly. You'll just let it be like waves in the ocean. You know, that's what minds do. But then you can rest in awareness and be aware of how the surface of the mind is waving, but you can be 30, 40 meters, metaphorically speaking, under the waves and just being here. Okay, so it's like a kind of shift from doing to being. And what mindfulness is an invitation to actually drop into the actuality of your life in the only moment any of us ever have. And it turns out that that's kind of quite a challenge, because as soon as you metaphorically or literally take your seat, you say, oh, now I'm just going to be, and I'm not going to judge how I do. So that was one out breath. And I'm aware of the body sitting here breathing, which is kind of the instruction. And then you all know from experience about how many nanoseconds it takes before the mind comes up with something else. Like, how long are we going to sit here? Or, my back is itching. Am I allowed to scratch it? Or do I have to be a good yogi and just tough it out? And it's one existential problem after another. And then you maybe are reminded by your instructor or by yourself that, oh, wait a minute. None of that's a problem. The instruction is to simply rest in awareness of what's unfolding in the present moment. So if the mind is wandering, you don't say, bad meditator, get your mind back to the object of attention. You are aware that the mind is wandering. That awareness is mindfulness. So it's not like, oh, if you're not on your breath, you can't be aware. You can be aware of not being on your breath. Can you see how forgiving that is? Can you see how intrinsically compassionate that is? Because we're always putting ourselves coincé in français, you know, that we're squeezing ourselves to sort of into a kind of idealized performance. I'm going to be really a good performer of mindfulness. I'm going to use a technical term here, bullshit. But we do that constantly to ourselves. You know what I'm saying? So it's very liberative to just suspend the judging by noticing how it's impossible to suspend the judging. You're driving yourself crazy with all these judgments about how you would be a really great meditator if only it were for this, and this, which are preventing you from being a good meditator. All of which, do you know what that's all called? I mean, I know there are a lot of psychologists in the room, and I know that everybody, whether you're a psychologist or not, knows what it's called, but I'll just cut to the chase. It's called thinking. It's called thinking. And you could say, well, what's wrong with thinking? And the answer is absolutely nothing. I mean, you know, that's part of our genius, our capacity for thinking and for emotion. So let's not degrade emotions, including sadness, including anger, including fear. They're incredibly important. They evolved, you know, as part of us. But how we are in relationship to it, it's all about relationality. Very often journalists will say, well, John, you know, kind of just give me in one word, what is mindfulness? And I'll say, well, pure awareness, which is 2 words, but still, I want to underscore the awareness, so pure is a good way to say it. But the other one is, that I'll say to journalists, is it's relationality. Mindfulness is relationality. But it really means like how aware of the incredible interconnectedness of the entire universe. Thich Nhat Hanh uses that wonderful term that he developed called interbeing. You recognize that like we inter-are in his language because we're infinitely connected. I said this earlier at the UN, but I'll do it again. It's kind of yogic exercise that I've never done before today, I don't think. But of course, my memory maybe is not a little unreliable, but if you take your hand and you put it down here and in your navel, just do that, and see if there's not some signature there that you used to be connected to something larger than yourself. When was the last time you thought of that? So interconnectedness is like just an absolute axiomatic, elemental part of who we are, and yet we think we're so independent and separate. We're one breath away from being dead at all times. And yet, how much of the time do you actually thank the air for being breathable? And of course, it's getting less breathable in certain ways. So, we take an awful lot for granted, and mindfulness, however you come to it, through MBSR, through MBCT, through MB je ne sais quoi, the important thing is the M, not the form. In the Prajnaparamita Sutra, some of the non-dual teachings in the Chan Zen tradition, it's like, it's axiomatic, like form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Of course, the thinking mind will just go insane over that because it will never understand it. And then no form, no emptiness. And then form is form, emptiness is emptiness. And there's a kind of journey in that of inner development, so to speak. And we speak about inner development goals in terms of sustainability. And so there are all these convergences because we need to take care of the planet, but we also need to take care of the body. And we need to take care of our own hearts, and we need to take care of what we most love. And what we most love is kind of like a koan. What do you most love? Do you love the air enough to remember that this in-breath is, is not toxic right now? But if you live in some parts of the world, it is toxic. And it doesn't have to be in sort of the, sort of global south. It could be, next to a uranium mining facility in Arizona or New Mexico, or, a factory that's producing all sorts of toxicity that it's not taking responsibility for because it's too expensive to take responsibility for waste. But the actual expense of it in terms of even planetary well-being and global warming is gigantic. But we've written that off because the resources are the planet's free. So now we're waking up. It's a mindfulness teaching. The planet is teaching us it ain't free. We're in profound relationship. There's that relationality again with the deep interconnectedness of the universe, this interbeing, not just with people, but with everything. And so when we take our seat, what time am I supposed to stop? Because once I get going, there's no telling. It's for 45 minutes, I was told, right? And what time did I start? Maybe 7. Okay, so we'll go another, whatever. It's an infinite number of moments, by the way, between now and whatever other moment of now you want to stop me at. So let's actually remember that the present moment is the only moment in which we are alive. And that we have available, and I'm using this terminology nowadays because of my admiration for Greta Thunberg, who is on the autism spectrum and actually speaks about it and you can see it if you've ever seen her give a talk to 50 million people or just be in her body, that it's a superpower. Her autism spectrum issues are her uniquely defining power. How many of you know what I'm talking about or have experienced it in some way by watching? Anybody? Okay. So So I've sort of adopted her audacity and saying, well, if she can say that about her, what most people would consider to be a deficit, I think we should begin to realize that thinking is a superpower. I mean, look, this is being sponsored by the universities. Okay, and universities are one of the cathedrals of learning of humanity. And they are insanely important, and they're under enormous attack in the United States by forces of darkness, like Mordor. That's one way to spell it. Another way to spell it is Trump. But seriously, it's no laughing matter, actually. And the fate of much more than the United States hangs in the balance with that. So, if thinking is a superpower, we are in possession of a superpower of a higher order of magnitude than that. And I'm asserting that that's awareness. Okay? And none of us need to acquire awareness. As I was saying, we're born with it. Okay? We're born with this capacity. It's never pointed out to us because when we go into the education system, it's all about thinking. It's changing now, actually, because they're bringing mindfulness into education on every level. And the first foundation of mindfulness in the classical Buddhist tradition is mindfulness of the body. First foundation of mindfulness. The second is what's called Vedanas. Mark Williams, another founder of MBCT, wrote a whole book on the Vedanas. Can you imagine that? An Oxford professor writing a book on the Vedanas, a cognitive scientist. And the Vedanas are just the differentiation between pleasant, unpleasant, and not pleasant or unpleasant, neutral. If you start to pay attention to how much we are prisoners of what we want, and what we're recoiling from, and what we don't notice because we're just driven by what we want or running from, then it's like you could say that it's kind of pathetically laughable that we're like puppets at the mercy of liking and disliking with no awareness that we're imprisoned by it. And what mindfulness does is it's like when the finger, have you ever seen a beautiful soap bubble and you just reach out and you touch it? And what happens? It goes pop, right? Okay. That's the heart of cognitive therapy. Mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. A thought arises in the mind, and you see it. A thought bubble. And the awareness just touches it if you've been trained to bring awareness to it and see it as an event in the field of awareness rather than the truth about me and how I'm going to, sort of fail at everything I've done. And then the awareness sees that whole thought constellation and story of me, pop. And in that moment, liberated, free. It's not an abstraction. In that moment, you're free, except that the habit is very strong, so it will come back and come back and come back. And that's where the training comes in. That's where exercising the muscle of mindfulness. And what do you need in order to exercise a muscle? What's this thing called that I have in my hand that you can't see? A weight. Okay? And what does the weight do? It provides, it starts with an R, resistance. Okay? And why do we go to the gym and work with, I was about to say against resistance, but actually you need the resistance, so we're not working against it. But if you think you are, then you're not going to come back to the gym on Wednesday. And when you work with a certain kind of resistance, not too much, not too little, something starts to grow, right? So it's the same with the meditation practice. You're sitting or walking, or standing on your head, or, some yoga posture. And when is it happening? Now, because that's the only moment anything is happening. And you just drop in. So let's drop in. The talk is not meant to be an entertainment. So the silence has at least as much validity as everything that I've been saying. So, dropping in. And seeing if you can first just experience the body sitting here breathing in the envelope of your own skin, in that surround. And notice that, the air is moving in and out of your body effortlessly. It's a conceit to actually say that you're breathing, because if it was up to you, you would have gotten distracted and died long ago. So you're not allowed anywhere near the brainstem and the phrenic nerve and the diaphragm that are keeping things going, including while we're sleeping. But we can ride on the waves of sensation in the belly or in the chest or at the nostrils or wherever the breath sensations are most vivid for you. And what you're instantiating is awareness itself. So it's not about the breath. The breath is just a convenient object of attention. But it's about resting, taking up residency in awareness in this only present moment. So there really is no place to go, nothing to do, nothing to attain, because you're already right here aware, and the breathing is happening by itself. And in a way, we're simply being breathed. And then you can investigate, and I'll sort of cut this short because there's a whole second part to this evening, and we don't want to keep you here all night or all month, although it'd be fun. Can you expand the field of awareness, and notice that you can expand the field of awareness around the breath to a sense of the body as a whole, and then investigate letting go of the body altogether and just resting in awareness of whatever's happening, because there's a lot of complex stuff happening. If your eyes are open, there's light coming in. I'm speaking, so you're listening and hopefully hearing where the words are pointing to, which is your own interiority of experience. And we're not trying to get anywhere else. In fact, what we're doing is putting out the welcome mat for this moment so that we can actually inhabit the only moment that is available to us. And then silence and awareness become synonymous or coextensive. Stillness, this particular moment, but if you were running, it wouldn't be stillness, but you'd still be aware. There's no human activity that you can't bring mindfulness to and turn it into it adds another dimension to the experience, the dimension of wakefulness, embodied wakefulness. And that comes with certain kind of characteristics, including discernment, wise seeing, so that you can actually regulate your actions in a more than mechanical way, because you're no longer being driven by impulse or by automaticity in your thought and emotional reactivity. You're responding rather than reacting. When the proverbial stuff hits the proverbial fan, what we call stress or pain or whatever, challenges, those are moments of profound opportunity. How am I going to respond rather than react? And you can exercise the muscle every time, so that every time something comes up that's a challenge, it's not the end of the world. It's an opportunity for you to actually exercise the muscle. And sometimes that means like exercising the muscle of compassion, because there's no separation between mindfulness and heartfulness. They tell me, I don't know from firsthand experience, but they tell me that most Asian languages, the word for mind and the word for heart, same word. So if you're not hearing heartfulness when I'm saying mindfulness, you're like light years away from understanding this. But with deep listening, you'll know it intuitively way underneath words. And that superpower of awareness, I hate to use this verb, but I haven't found a better one, trumps the superpower of thought. And we can actually gradually, through practicing, through a disciplined love affair of practice, because it is a love affair, actually shift the default mode from mindless reactivity and always being lost in thought and on the way to some better moment, to the inhabiting of the only moment we're in, and defaulting to not the sort of midline crazy activity of the default mode, but defaulting to wakefulness, as was demonstrated in Zindel-Siegel and his colleagues' study in 2008. So from that point of view, the formal meditation practices, whether it's lying down, body scan, or or sitting meditation, or standing meditation, or walking meditation, or talking meditation. There's no moment. Putting the kids to bed meditation if they're little kids, holding them when they're crying, seeing how much you want to control them when you can't. All of those are moments of love expressing itself in wakefulness. And so then there's no separation between meditation and life. Life becomes the meditation practice. Yes, formal meditation practice, especially if you're teaching MBSR or MBCT, 6 days a week, 45 minutes a day, minimal commitment, because we've got 8 weeks to transform something into a lifetime of intentionality and embodied practice. In 8 weeks, that's not that bad. And so, again, to come back to lying in bed, some people don't have the discipline to, get out of bed, get on their zafu and zabuton and sit cross-legged and, hey, wait a minute, can I have coffee first? Or something like that. So, as I said, in my later years, I've gotten a little looser about it. And I said, well, when you wake up in the morning, is it true, or are you telling yourself a story? Say, I woke up. Yeah, but did you wake up and jump out of bed and you're already late, as was said? Or are you really waking up? So why not stay in bed for another 10 minutes or 5 minutes and finish the job? Really wake up. Really wake up to what the Buddhists would call your true nature. And although you may never have heard that term, you know what I'm talking about. It's the you that's underneath your name and your age and your gender identification and how much stress you're under and everything else. It's the beauty of your manifestation as a human being on planet Earth at this moment. And we need each other, and the world needs all of us to show up in our completeness, in our fullness, in our love. And this, make no mistake about it, the formal meditation practices are a radical act of sanity to stop and drop from all the doing into being, but not to escape from the doing, but to bring the doing along, the being along when we get back to the doing, so that the doing is coming out of wisdom, out of being, out of our intrinsic wakefulness, which is what Linnaeus called us as a species, Homo sapiens sapiens, from the Latin sapere, which means to taste or to know. So the reason it's to taste is because if you want to know something, well, just watch what an infant does with every object that's graspable. What's the first thing they do? They put it in the mouth. The sort of core investigative faculty is like, put it in your mouth. Okay, we're trained not to do that. It's not socially acceptable and everything. But, you know, so we're the species that, through that capacity to taste experience, knows awareness is a wisdom, is the quality of knowing, but not merely conceptual. And yet, it's Homo sapiens sapiens, it's genus and species, and it's like, we don't just know, we know and know that we know. So it's like awareness and meta-awareness, not cognition and metacognition. And I feel like the kind of signature karmic assignment of humanity on planet Earth at this particular moment, when we're facing what the UN calls the polycrises that we've generated with our industriousness since the industrious revolution. This is an all-hands-on-deck moment on planet Earth, seriously speaking. But it's all hands on deck in our best seeming, in our totality, in our intrinsic beauty and wisdom. And that means it has to be grounded in open-hearted wakefulness. That's the kind of core of intelligence. And then we can recruit thought and emotion effectively to actually navigate with compassion what needs to be done depending on your particular calling, who you are, what you love, what you care about, and so forth. Do you get the drift of this? So then life itself is the real meditation practice. And there really is no other moment by now in which to instantiate it. And the now is always available. And you just check your watch right now. What time is it? It's now. In fact, when we run retreats, in MBSR, we often cover the clock with a big sign saying now. So every time you wonder, how much longer do we have? It's like, no, we don't know how much longer it is. We're not telling you when the bell's going to ring. Why? Because we don't know. But you're the teacher. You should know. You're controlling the whole thing. Yeah, but we're listening to something that's deeper than what it says on the piece of paper that we made up ourselves. So just to finish, mindfulness is not just one more cognitive behavioral technique that will amplify your arsenal of ways to help other people. It is a revolutionary and unique capacity that is inborn to our humanity, but that we need to actually not cultivate it because it's our gift that we are born with, but we do need to cultivate access, and ready access and reliable access when we need it, because otherwise, when the proverbial stuff does hit the proverbial fan, that's when we most lose our minds. And then even if you've been trained in mindfulness, you lose your mind. But that's okay too, because if you're not dead, the next moment you can reclaim it. See, so it's an incredibly gentle and generous and forgiving practice. And as I said, I mean, it took me decades to realize it, but when and I feel very strongly about the discipline of this, and we are very strong about the discipline of, like you do Dubai Sky, I don't care if you feel like it or not, you do it 6 days a week, whether you feel like it or not, and everything else that we're asking of you, because your life is hanging in the balance, your chronic pain, your depression, your anxiety, your whatever it is. So when you take your seat, this is not, oh my God, one more thing that I have to squeeze into my God-forsaken day that I don't have time for. This is a radical act of sanity. It's a political act, actually, but I won't talk about that anymore tonight. But it is actually a political act to stand in the fullness of who you are. And then it's not like you're not trying to become something. You're recognizing the full dimensionality of what you are. And that's what the word Buddha means. Buddha nature is it means awake. It means Homo sapiens sapiens, when you complete the trajectory into the name. And you don't have to perfect anything. Good enough is good enough, but the intention, in some sense, is everything. And to be compassionate with yourself. And so to please remember about the non-judgmental piece of it, that it's not some ideal that oh, we're supposed to be non-judgmental, that's impossible. No, you're supposed to be aware of just how judgmental you are, and then don't judge that, and rest in awareness. And it turns out it's like the soap bubble. The Tibetans actually have a term for it. They say, in awareness, the apparitions or the fabrications self-liberate. The fabrications in the mind, the constructions in the mind, they self-liberate, they come, they go, because they're obeying the law of impermanence. So I could actually go on like this for a few more hours, but because I really do feel like it is a love affair, and it looks like the room is pretty full from what I can see, and I'm very interested in why you came, because this is not some kind of theatrical performance. Oh, let's go see Jon KABAT-ZINN do something. What did he do? Oh, you wouldn't believe it. I could never put it into words. The fact is, you know, it's really interesting to ask yourself, why did you really, 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 really come? Every single one of you, no matter what your position, no matter how high up in the hierarchy of the university, of the hospitals, of the UN, why did you really, 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 really come tonight? And you can go home with that one and just let it blend in with your breath the next time you encounter yourself in the present moment, which could be right now. Thank you, folks. Pleasure.
Merci beaucoup, Jon.
Thank you, Jon. Thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution and all the work that you have done to alleviate suffering and mitigate mental health issues.
No? Okay. You have spoken to the heart of what really means to
Hold it closer
to
like an
meet.
ice cream cone.
You have spoken to the heart of what it means to meet this changing world with so many difficulties, with presence, with clarity, with an open heart, and with compassion. And we have some time for a few questions from the public, and I'll let Guido begin.
Yes. We can
thank
open.
you.
Is there a micro? Maybe I...
Thank you for this inspiring talk. Just would like to know if you have a reflection.
A little louder. Hold it closer like an ice cream cone.
Do you have a reflection about the fact that those practices of meditation have been alive for millennia by indigenous populations?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, any reflection about that?
Yes, and that's why I said, like, you know, we could talk about this for hours. This is, as I said, like, you know, it's like all of human history, the kind of, at least Western formulation and Eastern formulation of history in the Northern Hemisphere, is like just a couple of hundred generations, nothing. But, you know, there are peoples who have been living on this planet for 10,000 years, and they know something. Indigenous societies are at one or in relationship with the natural world in ways that we could really benefit from. We used to use words like primitive. They may not be primitive. We may be the primitive ones. So I won't go into it in any detail, but just to say, and I gave a talk yesterday at the UN, and I called it Many Doors, One Room. Okay? So the room is awareness, human awareness, okay? Whether you're an indigenous person living, you know, in South America or in Africa or anywhere, but there are just many, many different doors. And you stand in the doorway, and as Bob Dylan, the great yogi, said, don't just stand in the doorway, but if you do stand in the doorway and you admire how fantastic this doorway is. But the whole point is not to admire the doorway, but to enter the room, okay? And the room is the room of the human heart when it knows itself. And I don't mean knowing itself cognitively or conceptually. That's great. I mean, there's nothing wrong with thinking, but awareness is a superpower that eclipses the superpower of thinking. And without awareness and compassion and clarity and wisdom, thinking is very dangerous, you know, because it's dualistic and it will very rapidly create us and them. And then you see what is going on right now on the planet on that level. And it's us and them with nuclear weapons, drones, robots, and AI directing warfare.
Bonsoir, merci pour...
Good evening. Thank you for this presentation. I was very moved by... Good evening. Thank you for your presentation. I was very moved by the word you used. So I was deeply moved by what you've talked about, what is innate through mindfulness, the awareness, you use the term awareness, and if it's innate, if it's inherent, it's not something that's going to turn off. It's going to help me to keep hope and defend what we are defending here tonight. My question is, how can we cultivate this further and perhaps earlier in schools, for example, in order to allow new generations, future generations who are going to have to live in this changing world, the world that we are leaving for them, to have this ability to deal with difficulties and move forward despite complex difficulties.
It's already happening, you know, in the United States, and I think in France, certainly I know that it's happening. That people are bringing, teachers are bringing mindfulness into schools for a lot of different reasons, one of which is, you know, and even when I was a student in a very, you know, earlier era, it was really hard to get kids to pay attention. What is mindfulness all about? It's about mobilizing our capacity for attention, exercising that muscle. Instead of yelling at the kids to pay attention, why don't we teach them how to pay attention? Or why don't we recognize that they may already be paying attention, but they don't want to be paying attention to what you have to say? And the skillful teacher will actually know that, yeah, but you do need to understand something about what I have to teach, but how do you reach those kids in a way that it becomes an adventure rather than an ordeal? That's what a skillful teacher does. And then it's like fun. Learning becomes fun. And when you do that kind of thing as parents or with little children in school, you set them on a lifetime adventure of learning. It never, ever stops. And again, thinking and critical thinking, sort of analytical thinking, discernment, these are real profound human capacities. But without the awareness to nurture and cradle it in a certain way, very often it gets toxic in certain ways, and it does fall into that ussing and theming because, you know, my likes and my interests are different from yours, and that's why teachers are so effective in the classroom at regulating emotion among the kids. And when you learn it as a kid, maybe you won't start a nuclear war as a president of Russia.
Thank you very much for your lecture. I have a question. Amidst so many different uncertainties of today's world that you mentioned yourself, concurrent crises, raising inequalities, to name just a few, How can we, as human rights professionals, use mindfulness to be present and grounded and also resilient when
Human rights professionals,
yes,
did you say?
When, well, everyone, but, you know, referring
yeah,
to that
but you're
as well.
asking as a
Yes,
human rights professional.
exactly.
How many of you are here from the United Nations? Raise your hands. Okay. And I've spent the past 2 days at the United Nations, and I'll tell you, I'm a native New Yorker, and until Tuesday, I knew nothing about the United Nations. And my jaw has dropped down to my feet with admiration for what's going on in the United Nations, much of which it fails. But still, without the United Nations, we would be in just... And so I think there's enormous opportunity, and Geneva is like, really pregnant with possibilities for developing just the kind of skills that are necessary in diplomacy and in all other areas for recognizing the intrinsic beauty of everybody and all voices and different ways of knowing. So it's not all about like this ism or that ism or this tradition or that tradition, but our common humanity. And those are lessons that I think we need each other to teach. It's not about me. This is the one thing I didn't say. When you put the people in the scanner and they go into the story of me, starring me, the alternative to that in MBSR and in a lifetime of meditation is that you begin to actually realize that the story of me is an infinitesimal part of who I really, 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 really am. And what becomes most interesting at that point is relationality, that definition of mindfulness, and then the story of we. So the story of Spaceship Earth, and hey, we're all on the same rocket ship. Okay? And so we don't want to burn down half the rocket ship because that won't be good for the other half of the rocket ship because we're all breathing the same, I'll just say one more thing about this because we could go on forever about this. It's so important and so urgent. But if you take an apple and you consider the apple to be the earth, the atmosphere is the equivalent of the skin of the apple. That's how thin it is, 62 miles. But compared to the diameter of the earth, it's like the skin of the apple. We need to actually recognize the preciousness of that. Mars has enough atmosphere for a little helicopter to fly on there, and they're very clever to get the helicopter up there and flying around, but it wouldn't support life, except for Elon Musk. He maybe doesn't need to breathe. But for us, we need to take care of this planet because we don't have a planet B, as they say, okay? And this is a mindfulness curriculum. This is a compassion curriculum. And this is an all-hands-on-deck moment on planet Earth. And I just bow to everybody at the UN for really the level of care and attention and resources, even though there are not enough resources, they're resourced enough to actually, with the human resource, to actually make a difference in people's lives who are really facing, what I called in the title of my first book, the full catastrophe of the human condition. So it's a very, very strong wake-up moment on planet Earth. And I thank you for the question. Any questions beyond that thing over there? It's like we have three
I'm
tiers.
I'm really close to the border. Can I?
Okay, you're at the border.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll go across the border soon.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was intrigued by your remark about the difference between a reaction and a response.
Yeah.
Now, if we're in a conflictual situation where we're very much against the person we're talking with, how can we respond and not react and therefore create a better atmosphere maybe? Using mindfulness to convince someone, if you really deeply feel something and you know the other person thinks totally the opposite, how can we not react but respond?
How many people are interested in the answer to that question? This is the koan of humanity at the moment. And there's no one answer. It might just be a smile. It might just be a hug. It might just, it might just be recognizing how much hatred is in yourself, how much you are othering the other, and being right about it. Have you ever done that and actually been wrong? So, you know, this is the koan, or the final exam for humanity. The rest of the universe would care less if we destroy ourselves over the difference, you know, and they're very, very real, and they're very, very toxic, and there are very many people on planet Earth who are really suffering needlessly at injustice, at the hands of total injustice and violence. And I don't have to tell this audience, because you work with those people at the UN, you know, around the world, and I just like bow to you for never being resourced enough to do that. But what you're doing, to the degree that you can maintain your own equanimity in the face of the full catastrophe of the human condition, is itself unbelievably inspiring to others. And if you have a way to resource yourself so that you're not just gonna burn out instantly, then that's, in some sense, and when I talked with the High Commissioner a year ago on Zoom, and we had all these people from the UN on the call, I realized something about it, and it's like, the UN is a lot like medicine. The UN is like medicine for the world, and you're actually engaging in trying to help heal deep wounds that have very, very complex causes, and then the wound of planet Earth itself. And physicians burn out if they're not supported, if they don't have, you know, psychologists burn out. You have kind of, you know, trauma transference and all sorts of things. So we have to actually create professional, I don't like to use the word professional even, but groups of like-minded, intentional engagement that can actually support us in doing the impossible. Okay, that's the challenge. Let's do what's impossible with as much integrity as possible, and then let's withdraw from it before we destroy ourselves individually and let someone else come in and take over for a while, just the way in a football game. I'm talking American football, but also in European football. You relieve people, right? They go in, they go out. And so that's a very short answer to a very profound question. But again, I feel like mindfulness tells us that it's never about asking the expert what the answer to something is. You're the expert. Really. And from the Buddhist perspective, even the Buddha wasn't a Buddhist. The Buddhist message is you're a Buddha. You don't need to be a Buddhist. Just recognize your true nature. And then we can do that as a community, what's called a Sangha in that tradition. And the Sangha of the UN, or the Sangha of Geneva, or the Sangha of Europe. I mean, and don't forget, I mean, I have friends in Ukraine who are under bombs and, you know, missiles and drones right now. That's happening not far away. So, you know, the Sangha, in some sense, has to ask very, very deep questions about what it takes to heal planet Earth in all of the ways that planet Earth is really weeping, crying out for healing. And I think we can do it. And, you know, I know we can do it. Because, why? Because there's no alternative. The alternative is depression. And even mindfulness-based cognitive therapy wouldn't be able to handle that level of societal depression, no matter how good it is. So, in a sense, we have no choice but to live our way into our deepest humanity. And I'm not being romantically optimistic, because the stakes are very, very high, and they often don't look very good at all. But you know what? I have deep confidence then that when, and I'll use a technical term here, when we've fucked up just about everything, we'll actually wake up and make things happen in a better way.
I think that's it, yeah?
One more.
Last one. Last
Okay,
one.
this will be the last
May
one.
I ask just one question? My question is a bit personal, and it is
Wave your hand so I can see.
I'm here.
I see you.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. So my question is about mindfulness, and it's a bit personal for you, and I'm really interested in your answer. So meditation is a practice that was developed in a very specific context and with a very specific goal, a wider goal of becoming one with a greater structure, entity, however we want to call it. Mindfulness today is I feel as a researcher, is a generic term, an all-in-one, used to create trainings about emotion regulation. Even today in your lecture, you mentioned so many terms: awareness, attention, emotion regulations, metacognition, or meta-awareness. So when you took this practice from a very different context than the European or the American Sangha, why did you want to use it? What for? What was the goal? Because today we use it for everything and nothing at the same time. And we see in research that there is no transfer. The effects with the trainings, we cannot. Once we develop a skill within a specific structure, we cannot transfer it. Once we train a skill, talking about using mindfulness in emotion regulation, once we develop that within a specific training context, we cannot transfer it in a different context.
Why is that?
I don't know. I'm asking you.
It's generalizable. It may depend on how you're teaching it.
So this is the problem for you. So we can train anything with mindfulness. We can train concentration, we can train awareness, we can train attention, we can train emotion regulation.
Who's doing the training? That's what I want to know. When you say we, who are you talking about? Yourself?
No. But if you look at the literature today, there is so much variability in the findings.
Yeah, well, that's because, probably 90% of the literature is bullshit.
Okay. So
I mean, a lot of people have entered, I'm sorry, but...
How we should study it?
A lot of people have entered the field of mindfulness because all of a sudden it's like really popular, and if you breathe in and breathe out, you can write a PhD about how wonderful it was to breathe in and breathe out, and then write a paper in the journal Mindfulness, and then, but some percentage of what's being done, the research like that I quoted, just that one study, but great many studies are being done that are all converging on something that we don't fully understand yet. So that's the beauty of research, is most of it is garbage in any field. It's not just, in this field. I'm not saying it's not necessary, because people have to get PhDs, and it seems like you tell people to breathe in, breathe out, okay, you have a PhD. But, wow, mindfulness. But that's not what it is at all. And in terms of diversity, I really want to emphasize that there are an infinite number of doors into the room that we're talking about, because we're talking about human awareness, and it is a huge mystery, as I've tried to suggest. And so let's not reify it into one thing, but let's investigate it and embody it as if the fate of our own well-being and the fate of our community and the fate of our planet depended on it. And then we'll just see what happens. Big adventure. Thank you, folks. It's been a pleasure.
Merci beaucoup, Jon, pour cette soirée d'échange et de réflexion. Merci à vous tous. Et puis un immense merci à l'Université de Genève, au HUG et au Haut Commissariat des Nations Unies aux droits de l'homme.
What else can I say, Jon? Thank you. And you really gave us inspiration, thoughts. We will be reflecting on everything that you just said, and hopefully practicing as well, bringing awareness, presence, showing up fully in the very important work we do at the United Nations in our lives. So a mindful applause for Jon, and thanking him.
Thank you. Thank you.